The rain was coming down in sheets against the windshield of my Accord, the wipers slapping a frantic, rhythmic beat that did nothing to clear the blur of the highway ahead. I had been driving for nearly 5 hours, the caffeine from 3 gas station coffees turning my stomach into a knot of pure anxiety and exhaustion. I was supposed to be in Chicago for another 2 days, stuck in a windowless hotel conference room for a regional sales summit that my boss insisted was crucial for my career. But by 3 in the afternoon, as the corporate jargon blurred together and my phone buzzed with another standard, distracted text from my wife, Chloe, a sudden, suffocating wave of homesickness hit me. I didn't want to network. I didn't want to eat another expensive, lonely steak dinner on the company dime. I just wanted my own bed, my own kitchen, and the quiet comfort of the life I had built over the last 4 years. So I packed my bag, slipped out during the afternoon break, told my manager I had a sudden family emergency, and hit the interstate. I hadn't told Chloe I was coming back early. It wasn't meant to be some grand romantic gesture, nor was it a test. It was just a stupid, impulsive decision born out of pure exhaustion. I wanted to surprise her.
I pictured walking through the front door of our suburban colonial outside of Columbus, shedding my heavy coat, and finding her curled up on the living room sectional with a book or watching one of those trashy reality shows she pretended to hate. I even thought about stopping for takeout, but the weather was getting worse, the visibility dropping to near zero as I pulled into our subdivision. The neighborhood was dead, dark windows reflecting the street lamps, the only sound the steady roar of the storm. When I finally pulled into our driveway, I noticed Marcus's beat-up silver Civic was parked on the street, half blocking our mailbox. A familiar twinge of mild irritation flared in my chest, followed quickly by a wave of guilt. Marcus had been my best friend since our freshman year at Ohio State. We had shared cramped dorm rooms, survived terrible breakups, and stood as best men at each other's hypothetical future weddings. But over the last 6 months, Marcus's life had completely unraveled. He had lost his job at the logistics firm, gotten evicted from his apartment, and ended up sitting on our doorstep one Tuesday night with 2 duffel bags and a look of absolute defeat. Chloe and I hadn't even hesitated. We had a spare bedroom that we mostly used for storage, but Marcus insisted on taking the basement couch, claiming he didn't want to impose or feel like a permanent charity case. For the first few weeks, it was fine. It felt like a throwback to our college days, drinking beers on the porch and talking about sports. But as the weeks turned into months, the atmosphere in the house shifted. Marcus became a fixture, a permanent shadow in our domestic life. He was there when I woke up, he was there when I came home from work, and he was there sitting between Chloe and me on the couch every single evening. I loved the guy like a brother, but the lack of privacy was starting to wear on me. I had mentioned it to Chloe a week before my trip, suggesting that maybe we needed to give him a gentle nudge to find his own place, but she had gotten surprisingly defensive. She argued that he was going through a mental health crisis, that the job market was brutal, and that throwing him out would be a betrayal of our friendship. I had backed down, feeling like a selfish jerk. I cut the engine, the sudden silence inside the car heavy and absolute. I grabbed my duffel bag from the passenger seat, pulled my hood up, and ran through the downpour to the front porch. The porch light was off, which was unusual for 10 o'clock at night. I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking slightly from the cold and the residual caffeine jitters. When I finally found the front door key and turned it in the lock, the mechanism clicked open with a quiet, solid sound. Stepping into the entryway, the first thing that hit me was how incredibly quiet the house was. The only sound was the low, distant hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen and the steady drumming of the rain against the siding. The lights downstairs were completely off, casting long, distorted shadows across the hardwood floor. I set my duffel bag down by the coat rack, moving with instinctive caution so I wouldn't wake anyone up. I figured they were both asleep, or at least in their respective rooms. I walked into the kitchen to grab a glass of water, my eyes adjusting to the darkness. That's when I noticed the kitchen counter. There were 2 empty wine glasses standing next to an open bottle of Pinot Noir, a vintage I knew Chloe saved for special occasions. A half-eaten plate of artesian cheese and crackers sat next to them, the brie sweating slightly in the ambient room temperature. It looked like a scene from a date night, the kind of intimate setup Chloe and I hadn't managed to pull together in months because of our hectic schedules.
A strange, cold sensation prickled at the back of my neck. Marcus didn't drink wine. He was strictly a domestic beer guy. And Chloe rarely drank alone, especially not the expensive bottles. I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe they had just been hanging out, watching a movie, and Chloe had decided to open a bottle to be a good hostess. They had grown closer over the last few months, which I had initially been happy about. It made the living situation less awkward.
They would chat about books, go grocery shopping together when I was working late, and share inside jokes that I didn't quite catch. I had viewed it as a sign of a healthy, blended dynamic. But looking at those two glasses in the dark, empty kitchen, the silence of the house suddenly felt less like peace and more like a heavy, suffocating weight. I left the kitchen and walked toward the stairs, intending to go up to our bedroom, change out of my damp clothes, and crawl into bed next to my wife. But as I passed the basement door, which sat at the end of the main hallway, I noticed it was slightly ajar. A thin, faint sliver of warm light was escaping from the gap, casting a sharp line across the carpet. And then, through the silence, I heard it. It wasn't a loud noise. It was a soft, muffled sound, a low murmur of a voice, followed by a distinct, rhythmic shifting of weight against the old leather sofa downstairs. My heart did a sudden, violent flip in my chest, a cold spike of adrenaline hitting my bloodstream so hard it made my ears ring. I froze, my hand hovering inches from the banister of the upstairs staircase. Every rational instinct in my brain told me to turn around, to go upstairs, to loud cough, to make noise, to protect myself from whatever reality was waiting behind that door. But jealousy and a sickening primal curiosity are powerful things. They paralyze your reason and force your feet to move against your own will. I stepped toward the basement door, my bare feet making absolutely no sound on the hallway runner. My breath felt shallow, catching in my throat, as if the very air in our house had turned to glass. I reached out, my fingers trembling violently, and pushed the heavy wooden door open another 2 inches. The hinges didn't make a sound. The basement was a finished space, a large room with a media center, a pool table we never used, and the large L-shaped leather sectional where Marcus slept. The stairs leading down were carpeted, angling around a corner that blocked a direct view of the couch from the top landing. But as I leaned forward, tilting my head into the opening, the shadows on the far basement wall came into sharp focus, illuminated by the dim, ambient glow of the television screen, which was paused on a Netflix menu. 2 shadows were thrown against the drywall, amplified and distorted by the angle of the light. They were moving in a slow, agonizingly familiar paeans. I heard a whisper, a soft, breathless laugh that I would recognize anywhere in the world. It was Chloe. It was the specific, throaty laugh she only gave when she was completely relaxed, completely consumed by someone. "Marcus, wait," she murmured, her voice sounding incredibly close in the acoustic echo of the stairwell. "Did you hear something upstairs?" "It's just the rain, babe," a deep, low voice replied. Marcus, his voice lacked the stuttering, insecure tone he usually used around me lately.
It was confident, heavy with possession. "The storm is getting worse. Your husband is 5 hours away in a hotel room. Forget about it." I couldn't breathe. The physical sensation was like being struck in the sternum with a baseball bat, a sudden, brutal eviction of all the oxygen from my lungs. My knees felt weak, trembling so violently I had to press my palm flat against the doorframe to keep from collapsing down the stairs. The world shifted on its axis, the familiar walls of my home suddenly feeling foreign, hostile, and terrifying. I took one agonizing step down the carpeted stairs, then another, sinking into the darkness of the stairwell until I could see past the drywall partition. The television screen cast a cold blue light over the sectional. Marcus was sitting back against the cushions, his shirt gone, his chest rising and falling in the dim light. And draped across his lap, her hands tangled in his dark hair, was Chloe. She was wearing one of my oversized flannel shirts, the buttons undone, her shoulders bare. I watched, completely paralyzed, as Marcus reached up, his large hand cupping her jawline with a tenderness that made me physically sick, pulling her down into a deep, lingering kiss. Chloe groaned softly, leaning into him, her fingers tightening in his hair as she completely surrendered to the embrace. It wasn't a drunken mistake. It wasn't a sudden, impulsive lapse in judgment. The sheer comfort in their movements, the practiced ease with which their bodies fit together, told the whole story in a single, devastating second. This had been going on for a long time. The late-night talks, the defensive arguments about keeping him in our house, the shared looks at the dinner table. It all flashed through my mind like a rapid-fire sequence of puzzle pieces, finally locking into place to reveal a horrific picture. I had been funding their affair. I had been working 80 hours a week, driving across the Midwest, leaving my home so that my best friend could sleep with my wife in the basement I paid for. A hot, blinding wave of fury rushed through my veins, replacing the cold numbness. My hands clenched into fists, so tight my nails cut into my palms. I wanted to scream, to charge down those stairs, to tear Marcus off of her, to smash everything in that room to pieces. But as the anger peaked, an overwhelming, suffocating sense of humiliation immediately followed it, crushing the rage. I felt small. I felt utterly pathetic standing there in the dark, watching the two people I trusted most in the entire world completely destroy my existence without even knowing I was in the room. Chloe pulled back from the kiss, her eyes shining in the blue light of the television. She rested her forehead against his, her breath hitching. "I feel so guilty," she whispered, though there was no real conviction in her voice. It sounded like a line she was required to say, a token nod to a morality she had already abandoned. "He's a good guy, Marcus. He doesn't deserve this." Marcus didn't hesitate. He slid his hands down her waist, pulling her tighter against him. "We've talked about this, Chloe. You can't keep living a lie just to keep him happy. You don't love him the way you love me. You haven't for a long time. When the time is right, we'll figure it out. But tonight, he's not here. It's just us." Chloe didn't argue. She just closed her eyes, a look of profound relief washing over her face as she buried her face into the crook of his neck. I stood on the stairs, a ghost in my own life, watching my world burn to the ground. The rain outside seemed to grow louder, a deafening roar that mirrored the chaotic, screaming silence inside my own head. I had to make a choice in that exact second. I could step forward into the light and confront the nightmare, or I could do something else. My legs moved before my brain could process a single coherent thought. I didn't step down into the blue light of the basement. I didn't scream, and I didn't throw the punches that were screaming to be released from the tight, aching balls of my fists. Instead, I backed up the stairs, one agonizing, silent step at a time. My bare feet sank into the plush carpet, absorbing the weight of a man who felt like he had just been emptied out from the inside. I reached the main hallway, grabbed my duffel bag from the floor by the front door, and slipped back out into the torrential Ohio rain, closing the door behind me with a click, so faint it was swallowed entirely by the storm. I sat in my Accord, the engine idling roughly, the headlights turned off so no reflection would catch the front windows of the house. The rain was drumming against the roof like a frantic pulse, matching the terrifying speed of my own heart. My hands were locked on the steering wheel at 10 and 2, my knuckles white, my whole body shaking so violently that my teeth clicked together. I stared at the front door of my home, a house I had signed a 30-year mortgage on, a house where we had picked out paint swatches and argued over the placement of the living room rug. It looked like a tomb. I didn't drive away immediately. I couldn't. My brain was trapped in a horrific loop, replaying the sight of Chloe's fingers tangled in Marcus's hair, the specific, heavy tone of Marcus's voice when he called her babe. That word belonged to me. It was a stupid, casual endearment, but it was ours. Hearing it roll off his tongue with such practiced ease felt like a physical violation. I looked at the dashboard clock. It was 10:14 p.m. If I had stayed in Chicago, if I hadn't been so desperate to see my wife, I would be sitting in a Hilton bar right now, nursing an IPA and text messaging her that I loved her before going to sleep. I would have lived another 2 days in blissful, pathetic ignorance. A dark, toxic realization began to settle in the pit of my stomach as the heater blew dry, hot air into my face. The ignorance wasn't just limited to tonight. I started tracing the timeline backward, every single interaction over the past 6 months suddenly taking on a sinister dual meaning. I remembered 3 weeks ago when I came home late from a client dinner and found them balled in the kitchen, laughing so loud they didn't hear me walk in from the garage. Chloe had been flush, her face pink, claiming they had just been talking about a ridiculous commercial. I remembered the way Marcus would suddenly volunteer to go grocery shopping with her, offering to help carry the heavy bags, and how Chloe's mood would instantly brighten the moment he walked into a room. I had thought it was nice. I had literally told myself, I'm so glad my best friend and my wife get along so well. The memory of my own stupidity made me want to throw up right there over the center console. I pulled out of the driveway, the tires throwing up a spray of water against the asphalt as I rolled down the dark suburban street. I drove aimlessly for 20 minutes, the windshield wipers struggling against the downpour, before I found myself pulling into the parking lot of a 24-hour Walmart on the edge of town. It was bright, sterile, and mostly empty, the fluorescent lights reflecting off the wet pavement. I parked far away from the entrance, killed the engine, and just sat there in the dark. I took out my phone. My thumb hovered over Chloe's contact name. My instinct was to call her, to demand an explanation, to listen to her stutter and cry and try to construct a lie that would patch over the giant, gaping wound in our life. But as I stared at her picture on the screen, a photo I took of her laughing at a street festival last summer, a cold, calculating clarity started to overtake the initial shock. If I called her now, if I walked back in there raging, what would happen? She would cry. Marcus would look ashamed but protective. They would apologize, or maybe they wouldn't. Maybe they would pack their bags together and leave me standing alone in an empty house, holding the bill for a life they had already abandoned. Marcus had nothing to lose. He was already broke, living on my couch. Chloe had everything to lose, but she had already chosen him over me in the dark. I couldn't just give them the satisfaction of a clean emotional explosion. They had played me for a fool in my own home for months. They had looked me in the eye, eaten the food I paid for, lived under the roof I provided, all while sharing a secret, disgusting laugh at my expense. If I blew up now, I would lose control of the narrative. I needed a plan. I needed to know exactly how deep this rot went before I cut it out. I opened our shared bank account app on my phone. My eyes scanned the recent transactions. There it was. 2 days ago, a $60 charge at a boutique wine shop downtown. Yesterday, a $40 charge at an upscale grocery market. Chloe had told me she was just doing some basic meal prep while I was away. In reality, she was staging a romantic getaway using our joint credit card right under my nose. I felt a cold smile creep onto my face, a bitter, unnatural expression that felt completely foreign to my features. I decided to stay at a cheap motel near the highway for the night, checking in under a false name and paying cash so there would be no electronic footprint of my return to Columbus. The room smelled like stale cigarette smoke and industrial cleaner. I didn't sleep a single wink. I lay on top of the scratchy polyester bedspread with my clothes on, staring at the water stains on the ceiling tile, watching the headlights of passing semi-trucks track slowly across the wall. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them. I heard Marcus saying, "When the time is right, we'll figure it out." They were planning an exit strategy. They were waiting for the right moment to discard me. The next morning, at exactly 8 a.m., my phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was a text from Chloe. "Morning, babe. Hope the conference isn't too boring. Missing you today. Let me know when you think you'll be on the road tomorrow. Love you." The sheer, unadulterated sociopathy of the message made my blood run cold.
She had typed those words, added that exclamation point, probably while sitting at our kitchen island, maybe even wearing the same flannel shirt she had been wearing on Marcus's lap 10 hours earlier. She was playing her part flawlessly, keeping the provider calm and unsuspecting until they were ready to make their move. My thumbs hovered over the keyboard, my chest tight. I typed back, "Hey, morning. Yeah, pretty brutal meetings today. Looks like I'll be tied up until late tomorrow afternoon. Probably won't get back until Friday evening around dinner time. Love you too." I hit send. It was the first time I had ever intentionally
majorly lied to my wife in our 5 years together. It felt heavy, like a stone dropping into a well. But the moment the message marked as delivered, a strange sense of power washed over me. I had just given them another 36 hours. Another 36 hours to feel safe. Another 36 hours to grow careless. I checked out of the motel and drove straight to a local electronics store. I spent $400 on 3 small, motion-activated nanny cameras that connected directly to a cellular hotspot app on my phone. They were disguised as standard USB wall chargers, completely indistinguishable from the dozen miscellaneous plugs we had scattered around the house. I knew their schedule. On Thursdays, Marcus usually went to a local library for a few hours under the guise of applying for jobs, and Chloe had her weekly shift at the interior design firm until 2 p.m. I waited down the street from our house in a rental car I had picked up that morning, watching through the rearview mirror until I saw Chloe's SUV pull out of the driveway at 8:45 a.m. 10 minutes later, Marcus walked out the front door, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, walking toward the bus stop. The coast was clear. I walked into my own house like a thief, my heart hammering against my ribs. The air inside still smelled like the lavender candles Chloe liked to burn. I moved quickly, deliberately. I placed the first camera in the living room, plugged into an outlet behind a fake plant that gave a wide-angle view of the entire downstairs common area. The second went into the kitchen, tucked neatly between the toaster and the coffee maker. The third, the one that made my hands shake so badly I almost dropped it twice, went down into the basement. I plugged it into an extension cord beneath the television stand, facing directly toward the leather sectional. I tested the feeds on my phone. The picture was crystal clear. I could see the empty wine glasses from the night before still sitting in the kitchen sink, waiting to be washed. I left the house exactly as I found it, locking the door behind me. I drove to a diner down the road, ordered a plate of food I couldn't eat, and sat in a booth in the corner with my phone propped against a napkin dispenser, waiting for the feeds to go live. At exactly 2:15 p.m., my phone buzzed with a motion alert from the kitchen camera. My heart leaped into my throat as I tapped the notification, unlocking the screen to reveal a live, high-definition feed of my own home. Chloe had just walked through the side door, dropping her designer tote bag onto the kitchen island. She looked beautiful, wearing a cream-colored sweater I had bought her for her last birthday. She immediately walked over to the refrigerator, pulled out a pitcher of iced tea, and poured herself a glass. A moment later, Marcus walked into the frame from the hallway. He didn't have his shoes on, just thick wool socks, moving around the space with the relaxed, effortless comfort of a man who owned the place. I watched, completely frozen in the diner booth, as Marcus walked up behind my wife while her back was turned. He didn't hesitate. He slid his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. Chloe didn't jump. She didn't startle. She simply leaned her head back onto his shoulder, letting out a long, audible sigh that the tiny microphone on the camera picked up with agonizing clarity. "Hey," Marcus murmured, his lips brushing against the side of her neck. "How was work?" "Exhausting," she replied, turning around in his embrace so she was facing him, her hands resting flat against his chest. "My boss was on my case all day about the Miller account. I just wanted to come home." "Well, you're home now," Marcus said, smiling down at her. He reached out and tucked a strand of blonde hair behind her ear, his thumb lingering on her cheekbone. "And we have the whole place to ourselves until tomorrow night. Your husband texted me earlier, by the way, said his meetings are running late and he won't be back until Friday dinner." Chloe pulled back slightly, a flicker of something crossing her face. It wasn't guilt, not exactly. It looked more like a calculation. "He texted you? He told me the same thing. I almost feel bad, Marcus. He sounds completely wiped out on the phone." Marcus let out a short, cynical laugh, stepping back and leaning against the kitchen counter, right next to the hidden camera plug. "Don't do that to yourself, Chloe. We've overproduced this guilt. The guy lives for his job. He's happy as long as he's climbing the corporate ladder and paying the bills. He doesn't see you. Not really." "I know," she whispered, her voice dropping to a register that made my chest feel like it was being compressed by a hydraulic press. "But it's still hard, living under the same roof, pretending everything is fine. I hate the lying." "Then stop lying," Marcus said, his tone shifting, becoming sharper, more demanding. He took her hands in his. "We talked about this. Once he gets back from this trip, we need to find a time to tell him. I can't keep skulking around the basement like a ghost, Chloe. I love you. I want to be with you out in the open. We can find a small apartment downtown. It won't be as big as this place, but it'll be ours. Chloe looked down at their joined hands, a long silence stretching between them. The diner waitress came by and dropped the check on my table, but I didn't look up. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the little screen. I was looking at a total betrayal of my entire identity. The man talking about taking my wife to a downtown apartment was the same man I had loaned $5,000 to 3 months ago so he wouldn't default on his car loan. The woman contemplating leaving me was the woman I had held in my arms while she cried over her father's passing 2 years ago. "Let's just not talk about him today," Chloe finally said, looking up at Marcus with a soft, pleading smile. "Please, let's just have tonight." Marcus's expression softened instantly. "Whatever you want, beautiful." He reached out, grabbed her by the waist, and lifted her slightly, setting her down on top of the granite kitchen island. Chloe laughed, that same throaty, uninhibited laugh I had heard the night before, and wrapped her legs around his waist. They began to kiss, a passionate, desperate sort of embrace that felt entirely foreign to the domestic, comfortable marriage I thought I belonged to. I watched them for another 30 seconds before I forced myself to close the app, my hands shaking so violently I nearly dropped the phone into my untouched plate of eggs. I sat in the diner for a long time, the ambient noise of clinking silverware and low chatter fading into a dull, distant hum. The shock was entirely gone now, replaced by a cold, crystalline anger that felt almost heavy. They wanted to tell me when the time was right. They wanted to plan an exit strategy and leave me holding the emotional and financial wreckage of a broken marriage. No, I wasn't going to let them dictate the terms of my destruction. If my life was going to be upended, I was going to be the one holding the match. I got up, paid the bill, and walked out into the cool afternoon air. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the asphalt damp and reflective under a gray, overcast sky. I got back into my rental car and called a man named David Miller. David was a senior partner at a prominent family law firm in Columbus, and more importantly, he was an old college fraternity brother of my father's. I had his personal cell number from a holiday party a few years back. "Hey, David," I said when he answered, my voice sounding flat, emotionless, and completely detached from the panic raging inside me. "It's Logan. I need a favor. A big one. I need the best divorce attorney in the city, and I need an appointment by 4 o'clock today." David recognized the tone in my voice instantly.
There was no casual catching up, no small talk about my parents. He gave me an address downtown and told me to meet him in 45 minutes. The consultation in David's office was a blur of mahogany furniture, leather chairs, and legal jargon that felt entirely surreal. I sat across from him and a sharp, no-nonsense associate named Sarah, and I laid out everything. I told them about Marcus moving in, the late-night return, the scene in the basement, and the nanny cameras I had installed that morning. I even opened the app and showed Sarah a clip of the kitchen footage from an hour prior. Sarah watched the video with a completely blank expression, her legal mind already analyzing the angles. "Ohio is a no-fault divorce state, Logan," she explained gently, leaning forward on her desk. "Which means technically, proving infidelity doesn't automatically grant you a massive financial windfall or strip her of her marital assets. However, what this footage does do is give us incredible leverage, especially when it comes to the house and the division of debt. More importantly, it prevents her from trying to claim spousal support or turning this into a long, drawn-out custody-style battle over assets by lying about the timeline. I don't want to drag this out," I said, looking her dead in the eye. "I want them out of my house. I want my name taken off her car loan. I want a clean break, and I want it done before they even realize I know." Sarah smiled, a cold, professional expression that made me glad she was on my side. "We can file an emergency motion for exclusive occupancy of the marital residence based on the circumstances, especially since you are the sole earner providing for the third party in the home under fraudulent pretenses. But if you want maximum leverage, we need to let them play out their script for one more night. Let them document their behavior on those cameras. Tomorrow afternoon, when you are supposedly driving back from Chicago, I will have a process server ready to deliver the papers directly to her at the house. You walk in right behind them." "And Marcus?" I asked, the name tasting like ash in my mouth.
"We'll handle Marcus," Sarah said. "He's an unauthorized tenant who has overstayed his welcome. We can include a formal notice to quit as part of the filing, giving him exactly 24 hours to vacate the property before the police are involved for trespassing. But Logan, you have to promise me one thing." "What's that?" "You cannot go back to that house tonight," she said seriously. "You cannot text her anything angry. You cannot let her know you are in Columbus. You have to play the part of the oblivious husband for exactly 24 more hours. Can you do that?" I looked at my phone, where a new notification was flashing, another motion alert from the basement camera. I didn't open it. I locked the screen and looked back at Sarah. "Yeah," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "I can play the part." The final 24 hours were a masterclass in psychological torture. I checked into a different motel on the outskirts of the city, a place where the neon sign buzzed a relentless, maddening hum through the thin, dry wall. I kept my promise to Sarah. I didn't open the camera app again that night. I knew that if I watched whatever they were doing on that leather sectional, the fragile, icy composure I had constructed would shatter into 1,000 pieces, and I would end up driving to the house with a baseball bat. Instead, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the muted television screen, watching the digital clock slowly tick toward the afternoon. On Friday morning, I sent my final script. "Hey, Chloe, just wrapping up the final session now. Heading out to the car in a few minutes. Traffic looks a little heavy around Indianapolis, so I'm aiming to be home by around 5:30 or 6 p.m. Can't wait to get out of these work clothes." Her response came 10 minutes later. "Safe driving, love. I'm working on a little surprise dinner for us tonight to celebrate you being done with that awful trip. See you soon." The sheer, staggering level of her duplicity didn't even hurt anymore. The pain had burned itself out, leaving behind a cold, hollow vacuum of pure calculation. A surprise dinner.
I wondered if Marcus was going to help her prep the ingredients, or if he was planning to hide in the basement until I went to sleep so he could creep back up into my kitchen. It didn't matter. In a few hours, the play was coming to an end. At 4:45 p.m., I met Sarah and a burly, plainclothes man named Gary in the parking lot of a strip mall 2 miles from my house. Gary was a retired sheriff's deputy who now worked as a professional process server. He had a thick manila envelope resting on his dashboard, containing the emergency filing for exclusive occupancy, the divorce petition, and a formal trespass notice addressed directly to Marcus. "We go in hot, but we stay completely calm, Logan," Sarah reminded me, leaning against the door of her sedan. "Gary will knock first. He will state his business, identify Chloe, and hand her the documents. Once the documents are legally served, you walk in. I will be right behind you to document the state of the house and ensure Marcus understands the legal ramifications of remaining on the property past tomorrow afternoon. Do not engage in a shouting match. Do not let them bait you. Let the paperwork do the talking." I nodded, my chest feeling tight, my hands steady on the steering wheel of my rental car. "Let's go." The drive into my subdivision felt entirely surreal. The sun was beginning to dip below the tree line, casting long golden shadows across the manicured lawns and the concrete driveways. Neighbors were pulling their trash cans in. A kid was riding a bicycle down the sidewalk. It was a picture-perfect scene of American suburban bliss, completely detached from the domestic execution that was about to take place inside house number 1114. We pulled up to the house in a neat caravan. I parked my rental car 2 houses down, while Gary pulled directly into the driveway, blocking Marcus's Civic. Sarah parked right behind him. My heart was thumping a heavy, low rhythm against my ribs as I stepped out of the vehicle. The air smelled like fresh-cut grass and impending rain. I walked up the driveway, flanking Sarah, as Gary marched up the front porch steps with the manila envelope tucked firmly under his arm. He didn't hesitate. He rang the doorbell and gave the heavy oak door 3 sharp, authoritative knocks. A moment later, the lock clicked. The door opened about halfway, and Chloe stood there. She was wearing a beautiful black summer dress, her hair done up, a welcoming smile already forming on her lips, a smile meant for me. When she saw Gary's imposing frame instead, her expression instantly faltered, turning into a look of defensive confusion. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice cautious. "Are you Chloe Vance?" Gary asked, his voice booming and professional. "Yes. My name is Gary Vance. I am a registered process server for the state of Ohio." "You are being formally served with a petition for dissolution of marriage, an emergency order for exclusive occupancy, and a notice of intent to file a restraining order regarding marital assets." He extended the thick envelope toward her. Chloe's hand stayed frozen at her sides,
her face draining of all color in a matter of seconds. "What? No, this is a mistake. I think you have the wrong house." "It's the right house, Chloe," I said, stepping out from behind Gary's shadow and walking up the porch steps. The moment her eyes met mine, a look of absolute, unadulterated terror washed over her features. She looked at me, then at the envelope, then back at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "Logan? What are you doing? Why are you with a rental car? You said you were in Indianapolis." "I was never in Indianapolis today, Chloe," I said, my voice completely flat, completely devoid of the warmth she had traded away. "And I wasn't in Chicago last night either. I came home on Wednesday, early. I went downstairs to say hello, but you and Marcus seemed a little busy on the couch." The silence that followed my words was deafening. The color didn't just leave her face. It looked like her entire body went rigid with a sudden, paralyzing shock. The realization of what I had seen, of how long I had known, hit her like a physical blow. She staggered back a half step into the entryway, her hand flying to her mouth. "Logan?"
"Please," she whispered, her voice cracking, tears instantly welling up in her eyes. "It's not what you think. Please, let me explain. It was a mistake. It was just—"
"Save it," I interrupted, stepping past Gary and walking right into my own house. From the hallway, Marcus appeared. He had been coming out of the kitchen, holding a bottle of beer, a confused smirk on his face that instantly vanished the moment he saw me, Sarah, and the process server standing in the foyer. He froze, his eyes darting between me and the crying woman clutching a legal envelope. "What's going on here?" Marcus tried to say, attempting to summon an aggressive, protective tone, but his voice cracked slightly on the last word. He looked like a little boy caught stealing from the pantry. Sarah stepped forward, pulling a separate document from her briefcase. "Marcus Miller? My name is Sarah Jenkins, counsel for Logan Vance. You are being formally served with a notice to quit and an immediate demand to vacate these premises. As of this moment, your status as a guest in this home is revoked. You have exactly 24 hours to remove your personal belongings from the property. If you are found on this premises after 5 p.m. tomorrow, the Columbus Police Department will be called and you will be arrested for criminal trespassing." Marcus looked at the paper she held out, his jaw dropping. He didn't take it. Sarah simply dropped it onto the entryway table next to his car keys. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and embarrassment. "Logan, man, look, let's just talk about this. We're brothers, man. Don't do this." "We were never brothers, Marcus," I said, looking at him with a level of disgust that made him take a step back. "Brothers don't sleep with a man's wife in a house he pays for while taking his money for a car loan. You have 24 hours. Get your textbook life out of my basement." Chloe was sobbing now, the heavy, ugly tears of someone who had suddenly realized that the safety net they had taken for granted had been completely ripped away. She reached out to grab my arm, her fingers trembling. "Logan, please, don't do this to us. We can go to counseling. We can fix this. I love you. I swear I love you. Marcus didn't mean anything. It was just—" "You told him you loved him, Chloe," I said, turning my gaze to her, my voice cracking just a fraction before I locked it down. "I heard you. I saw you on the kitchen island yesterday afternoon. I saw you on the couch on Wednesday night. I have the video feeds from 3 different rooms in this house. Every single word, every single touch. It's all backed up on a cloud server that Sarah already has a copy of." The mention of the cameras completely broke her. Whatever defense she was trying to formulate, whatever lie she was preparing to spin about a one-time lapse in judgment, dissolved instantly. She looked at me with the profound, terrifying realization that she was completely uncovered. There was no hiding, no negotiating, no fixing it. "I want you both out of my sight," I said, stepping back toward the front door, where Sarah and Gary were standing guard. "I am leaving for the weekend. When I come back on Monday morning, Marcus will be gone. And Chloe, your bags better be packed too. The lawyers will handle the rest." I turned around and walked out the front door, leaving the two of them standing in the beautiful, expensive home they had turned into a monument of betrayal. As I walked down the driveway into the cool evening air, the first heavy drops of a new storm began to fall, washing the dust off the pavement. I didn't look back. For the first time in 6 months,
I felt like I could finally breathe.